sometimes the fates just align and you get both a Talkin' Tuesday and Tuesday takeaways all at once.
Wow.
How can you beat that on the Podcast Daily? That's Bill Landis. I am Austin Ward. We heard from the Brain Trust, Ryan Day, Brian Hartline, Matt Patricia on Monday. So we've got some thoughts from that because we didn't have snap judgments on Monday. Came to Roosters to hang out. And we're here bright and early as well to do that now.
And we're going
to hear from Larry Johnson and the defensive line later today in the Woody Hayes Athletic Center as spring practice number 5 rolls along for the Buckeyes. So should we preview or review? Where should we begin?
Let's review.
Okay.
Because I thought there was some interesting conversation. It was actually a question I had down that I wanted to ask, and then Ryan Daly sort of answered it without being asked about it. And it's the idea that like Brian Hartline as the play caller is not the quarterback's coach, and that relationship obviously is incredibly important. I was reminded, I guess I could have looked on Wikipedia and did the research myself, that when Ryan Day was a play caller at Temple, I think it was in 2012, he was the receivers coach. He hasn't always been a quarterback's coach and offensive coordinator. So he's got that experience to fall back on, I think, to help Brian Hartline through the balance of coaching his position, calling the plays, but then also, I think, fostering a pretty strong relationship with whoever the quarterback ends up being up. And I was just wondering about maybe like some of the challenges that might come with that. And, Brian Hartline's the kind of guy that I don't know that necessarily likes talking about the challenges of it. He'd rather just like go do it, right? It's like,
definitely doesn't.
I believe I can do it. Just let me go do it, and then we can talk about it later. So like he didn't talk about it too much, which is fine. But Ryan Day actually did expand on it in sort of like a more general question about Brian Hartline and said that he's trying to help him with that. They have him on the headset, constantly talking with the quarterback, not just relaying the play, but I think trying to give a feel for what it's going to be like on a game day when you're giving that extra information to the quarterback too. And Brian Hartline's going to meet with quarterbacks and receivers together. I wonder if he ever might meet with whoever. Like I said, you have to wait till the starting quarterback, I guess his name, to like really meet with the starter on sort of like game plan kind of stuff. But it's just an additional layer of Brian Hartline taking over play calling duties that is on one hand like obvious, like he has to have a good relationship with the quarterback, but one I don't think we've ever actually kind of like broached as we've had this 2-year-long conversation about whether or not Brian Hartline is going to call plays.
I think Monday was also a reminder that because Brian Hartline has had on the headset before, and 2 years ago was calling plays, but the way the actual communication worked was different. It wasn't direct into the helmet, headset to helmet, direct conversation with the quarterback. So that was Brian Hartline to the play callers on the sideline, the signal callers, and not necessarily developing chemistry rapport with the quarterbacks directly. Not saying that was never part of the conversation or part of the job, but it was not the way that it worked before. So I think, we kind of kicked that around on Monday. How much on Monday's Daily, would Brian Hartline talk about wearing a headset at practice? What is he saying? What is he doing? How is it different than 2 years ago to now? And he doesn't really want to participate in that. As you said, he got really worn out of that conversation 2 years ago. But Ryan Day was quick to make that point. Say, well, he's got to be able to have, an understanding, familiarity, a chemistry, a rapport, be able to get back and forth with the quarterbacks, which is not something that he would have really had to strive to build previously. That would be critical with the wide receivers, and you're going to ask them to do something, and they better, have an understanding eye to eye of how that's going to work and what that looks like for the position. Now Brian Hartline has to expand that. The quarterback is the most important position, and that's going to be a person that he is talking to directly on Saturdays when the games start.
Yeah, and the one thing that Brian Hartline did say, echoing what Ryan Day said, is that, like, I guess when it's disjointed is not the right word, because disjointed implies like something's wrong. It's just the line of communication is a little different than it has been when the person calling the plays and having those kind of conversations with the quarterback is also the guy who happens to be running his meeting room. So like sometimes whoever the starter is going to be in meetings with Billy Fessler, and then he might meet with Brian Hartline, or at least have conversations with Brian Hartline on the practice field. And like those messages have to be consistent, and it's going to require a lot of work, I think, between Brian Hartline and Billy Fessler. And Brian Hartline also said, like, and I give him credit for it, because that's the position he's in as the OC, is like, it's what I want. Like, it's not like it's according to what Ryan Day wants, because Ryan Day has set the agenda for the quarterback playing offensive player. But like as the OC, like the chain of command in terms of like communication points doesn't start with the quarterback's coach, who's not a play caller. It starts with the guy who's the play caller. So like that's like from Brian Hartline down, I think, to all the position coaches, obviously, but to Billy Fessler, specifically in this area. Like those guys have to be on the same page, and it's not that being on the same page wasn't important prior to this. I just think maybe like the margin for error or like acceptable lapses within that chain of communication just sort of gets reduced and heightened a little bit when you have a play caller who's not coaching the quarterbacks every second of every single day.
I think even the way that Ohio State and Ryan Day and Brian Hartline are talking about doing this is notably different than 2 years ago, where, again, we're 2 years removed from it, and even just the logistics are different than they were then. But it was like, oh, there are going to be periods in practice where Brian's going to put the headset on. He's going to work on calling the plays, practice the verbiage, the communication, getting the signals in. But we're not going to do that all the time. It's not even Ohio State described it as different for Chip Kelly, that he was doing that in every single practice and maybe not every single period with everything that goes on, but that was the daily part of conversation and something they were building reps on for both the coordinator and the quarterback. So, 2 years ago, it was a sort of thing that was like, this is a trial. It's not mandatory. Maybe it'll go well. Maybe it doesn't. No, this is like critical to the operations now. It feels very different, not just because it's Brian Hartline, but even because Chip Kelly was doing it that way a year ago.
Yeah, but I think Chip Kelly or Brian, the thing that Brian Hartline has said a couple times, and the multiple times we've talked to him now since this news came out, is like that I think he was just sort of like watching Chip and like observing how Chip did it, and which is great. Like he said 2 weeks ago before spring practice, and he said again on Monday, like, if you were just sort of standing around doing your own thing, doing it well, but then like not paying attention to what the people above you were doing and how they approach your day to day, then you're just wasting your time. And
yeah,
I don't know. I wonder if him saying that is in any part like an admission that he wasn't always using his time that wisely, as like being like an awesome receivers coach, but maybe taking the time to like learn a little bit about quarterback play, learn a little bit about offensive line, run game, this communication piece, like all of it. And it seems like maybe in the last 2 years I'm speaking for him, but I maybe perhaps a bit more intentional about doing all those things. So it's critically important, as you said, but I don't know that I'm worried about it necessarily. More just curious because it's a different dynamic, but it also seems like Brian Hartline fully understands that, and Ryan Day will certainly remind him of it, so that like they're not going to let anything kind of fall through the cracks.
Yeah. Brian Hartline was asked about that. It's like, well, how is it different, for you now compared to 2 years ago? And he was like, well, there's a lot that can be said there, because, part of it would be on him and his professional development, but other parts, I think you can look at it even from the outside and see, was the staff aligned properly? Was the roster built the same way? They were dealing with inexperience in a transition at quarterback. There were a lot of things that in a lot of pieces, the run game situation was not what it is now, and it wasn't perhaps, supported or funded at the level that it currently is for Ohio State with the coaching staff and the makeup of the offensive line and the running backs. Like all these, you look at all these factors and it's like, well, then the ultimate domino at the top, which was like Ryan Day still existed and did not really want to let go of the reins. Like there are 100 things that go into it, and I think there'll always be this tendency to be like, what are you doing that's different? And that's part of it. There are like 50 different things that have now made this a better fit and a better opportunity for Brian Hartline than it was 2 years ago. Yep. And I think I don't want to oversimplify it to just one thing, but if he's going to talk about that, and then he is going to not waste days being around Chip Kelly or Justin Fry or Keenan Bailey or Billy Fessler or anybody else, like that's part of it.
The environment's very different, yeah, which is not, it's no small thing. You have, and it starts with, I think, like Ryan Day having gone through last year, gaining the comfort level of like finally handing over the play calling, right? Because it was clear, as we've said, it was clear on his face 2 years ago. He's like, oh yeah, we're gonna let Brian call plays. It's like, you're not convincing.
It's like, I hope he enjoys these training wheels.
Yeah. So, but that I don't think that's the case now. I think Ryan Day is far more comfortable with that idea now than he was back then. You have a guy like Tyler Bowen who has called plays, who has a run game expertise, who will have a loud voice in that room. I think some things were learned with Chip Kelly about like the right ways to run the ball and the right way to design that and marry it with the pass game that'll make the offense a little bit better situated than it was back then. I think like the O-lines, there's a lot, like top to bottom, like their offensive staff is better. I think in a lot of regards, like some of the personnel is more suited to provide like some of the balance that Ohio State was missing when they first entertained this idea a couple of years ago. So then if like everything around you is sort of lined up for you to do your job well, then all is just sort of like on Brian Hartline to bring the kind of daily approach that he was talking about. And I think that he understands the expectations that come with that, and he's not going to let it slip.
Yeah, he definitely does, and hasn't decided if he's going to be in the press box or on the sideline yet. So, boy, I bet 4 days have gone by and we just don't have an answer.
I bet we don't get an answer on that until like the week before the Texas game.
Yeah, the Thursday beforehand.
Yeah,
he'll decide.
Yeah,
but we did spend a lot of time on that on Monday, and there wasn't a ton of other things necessarily with Ryan Day. That sounds crazy to say, to really dive into, but it was a shorter press conference. Did start much later because there's so much recruiting stuff going on for Ohio State. That was really where I think their focus was, and we had 15 to 20 minutes with Ryan Day, and then on to the coordinators, where I think we're able to get more into the nitty gritty details of the roster at that point than we did with Ryan Day on Monday, which is fine. We talked to him a lot at the end of the day.
We do, and we'll talk to him. We'll talk to him more. It was good to start to get some of Matt Patricia's perspectives on some of the defensive pieces. You asked him about the nickel spot, and then he sort of expanded that to some other positions where he thinks like the versatility of those spots sort of dictate what he's able to do defensively. I thought it was really interesting what he said about safeties and how much fun you can have when you have versatile guys you can move around. And obviously we all think about Caleb Downs when he says that, but then I think he was asked a specific question about Malik Hartford at a different point in his press conference, and he said he thinks Malik Hartford has some pretty good versatility. He's a guy who can play down, can play back, has good range, has gotten bigger and stronger. So there's a lot of moving pieces there. I don't know that I came away thinking like, oh, they're going to do this, this, and this. I'm more so like even more open-minded to what they could potentially do. But he expressed excitement about the versatility at safety. Some of the guys that we're running through a nickel position, some of what you see at linebacker with guys like Sonny Styles and Arvell Reese and CJ Hicks, which like brings me back to a point that I brought up at the Rooster show. Like I just wonder if they have that at tackle, defensive tackle, and if they don't, how does that then impact all of the other stuff you want to do?
Yeah.
Because they have the bodies to play at the 4-down defensive line. They've played forever. While we're still trying to figure out what that depth looks like, but I think you need some of the like he had Vince Wilfork for like a decade in New England, and they don't have to go get Vince Wilfork. Although if there's one
if you
available,
can,
by all means go get one. Just like hearing all of that, and like Larry Johnson's going to talk on Tuesday, and I don't know if he'll want to go down this road or not, but I and probably not because it's hard to talk about it without coming off as like unhappy with what his room looks like currently. I think it's a good room. But I wonder if they're on the lookout for like a certain body type in the portal after spring, if one might emerge, which is to say like a bigger body traditional nose tackle that they don't really have on the roster right now.
It sure feels like they are. I mean, Ryan Day, relatively unprompted, talking about Hero Canoe and his transfer to Texas going into camp, and then the way that things have gone the first week. Matt Patricia was also asked about that in a less direct way than I think you wanted to get at with the multiple fronts and odd fronts. And it's like they're not pounding the table and saying this depth is 100% where it needs to be, and we can do this and that and the other thing. I don't think that they're unhappy, and maybe that's why they're being careful about it. I think they could certainly go through the year and be a very productive defensive line at end and at tackle, and operate multiple schemes, use Kenyatta Jackson and CJ Hicks to create havoc and turn Caden McDonald, Edric Houston loose and be like, yep, that's what it's supposed to look like. But I think the twin factors of the length of the season, which we hear about more than ever, especially as Ohio State navigated one for the first time to go through 16 games, and just the sheer number of bodies, all of that sort of combined to like, yeah, things are good, but maybe they could get better in April. I think that's like, everything seems to be pointing that direction.
Yeah, and I don't bring this up because I think they want to be like stagnant one way or the other, 3 down, 4 down. I think they want to have the ability to be versatile within that, but I also don't think you want to be asking Caden McDonald to play every single snap of nose tackle when you decide you want to play 3 down. And like, it's not the NFL, so, and it's not like every interior offensive lineman you see is 6'5" and 320 pounds like they tend to be in the league. So you don't have to go find a guy who's 340 to stick in the middle of your defensive line necessarily, but if you look at their defensive linemen, they've recruited to a style more or less. Like they don't have a lot of 300-pound defensive linemen. Caden McDonald is, I think, like 320. I think Tywone Malone might be like 305. But then the other guy they're talking about, like at the nose spot, is like Will Smith is put on weight to be nose. He's put on weight to be 280.
Yeah.
Like it's not. So it's not. And I'm not trying to like throw shade at Will. Like I'm excited to see him get some opportunities, and I feel bad that he's been injured or not been able to have them. I just like that is. It's the one area that I think everybody sort of looked at and wonder, like, is this going to be 100% of what it needs to be? Maybe defensive line generally, but I think perhaps tackle specifically. Once you got past Caden McDonald and Edric Houston, who are scheme versatile and can thrive no matter what you want to do, but you need more bodies beyond them. And, you know, they could go out and find a classic Larry Johnson 3-tech in the portal, but might they want to go find a 2-gap and big old defensive tackle to play at nose, which they have not had in this program for, like, at least in the time that I've been covering it.
Yeah, and I think, you know, maybe in a week's time or 2 weeks' time, that conversation becomes different for them. Will Smith can do it, or Tywone Malone's had a great camp, or Jason Moore.
Jason Moore is the one that's most interesting, I think, because he is, I think, over 300 pounds now.
Yeah, and is really tall, and you can tell that he's filling out with the upper body and the strength in his arms. Like, you can see that power there. You looked at him when he arrived, and you're just like, well, that dude is going to be able to play football. But it was like putting all the pieces together has taken a little bit of time, which is not, you know, none of this is meant to be a knock on the way the room is constructed or the individuals. But I think there seems to be this just realization of having to play depth over the length of the season, and Hero Kanu has just sort of taken on this outsized influence by not being around.
Yeah.
Where, like, I think part of what they wanted to do with being maybe more multiple than we've seen traditionally for Ohio State, it's like reliant on someone with his skill set, and now they don't necessarily. They at least have one fewer. Maybe they still feel like they have enough. I don't know. That Larry Johnson's going to have to answer that, but it does, and Ryan Day and Matt Patricia, like, that's a job for all of them to decide. But they also have had 2 days of pads on, they don't have enough to really go off of, because this group is relatively inexperienced, and we're in March, in the middle of March still.
Yeah, I don't. There's at least another, I don't know, probably 6 or 7 practices, I think, before you even feel like you might have enough data to figure out one way or the other which direction you might have to go on that. And nothing about like what Matt Patricia said on Monday, or anything Ryan Day has said, you know, in various availability since the end of last season, makes me think they're like panicked about it in any way. But we'll see. Like you said, like either things can happen in these next couple of practices that like make them feel really good about it, or open their eyes to, like, okay, we need to be like fairly aggressive here. And I don't know which way that's going to go. I guess I've been like on the side of I bet they at least look for a tackle, but the guy has to be in there too, right? It's not like
it's no guarantee that's going to happen.
No, and I was looking through like some of the portal in general. Actually, I feel like it had a lot of guys. I don't know if it had a lot of dudes. So we'll see what the spring window might provide for a team like Ohio State, but it could just be that the answer is not out there, and then if it's not, you do what Matt Patricia said all along, which is you tailor the defense to what your personnel does best, and Ohio State will be fine.
It does. It feels like the balance of portal hysteria and normalization has happened like way quicker than I thought it would. In terms of, can you overhaul a roster? Can you overhaul a position immediately? There's going to be a buffet of options available to you. I don't think that has transpired in the way that people really expected. Is it more movement than previously? Of course it is. Has the sport become unidentifiable? I don't know. It depends on what you're comparing it to. The 1950s, maybe.
Yeah.
But like, it's not. And I think that it was almost this way already a year ago or 2 years ago. Like, you can't just go find 5-star ready-made starters at every single position, because everybody else is locking them up with house settlement money and NIL opportunities. I don't think that the movement of elite players has materialized in the way that many people feared.
I don't know that they're like, if you went into the portal, I guess I'd have to do the research. But like, could you go into the portal with what was available this past window and fill out a 22-man starting lineup of like real difference makers.
Hmm.
And I don't know that you could. I think maybe in a given year there's going to be anywhere between like 10 to 15 of those like real like guys who elevate something significantly. But then those guys are probably just going to go to the teams that are already very good. Like you can transform stuff. Like Indiana went from a roster that probably like didn't have enough FBS caliber football players on it to having enough to drastically change the outlook for their season. But like then they still like they got classed by Ohio State once they got on the field. Like there's a limit to how much you can do that. So like, it is a little. I think it's a little foolish for any team / fan base, whoever is looking at it, to just automatically think there's going to be an answer for you in the portal. I think it turned out for Ohio State this year when it came to like offensive tackle specifically, there was. I think when it came to running back, I don't know that CJ Donaldson was their first choice, but then he showed up and like made himself into a guy that looks like he should have been their first choice.
Right.
And then you get like a bonus guy like Max Clare, but like all that is to say that like there's no, if you think like tackle or defensive line in general is like really a need for Ohio State, like the difference between Ohio State like winning a national championship and not, and I don't think that it is, but it'd be great to add somebody. There is hardly a guarantee that that guy is out there, especially once you get to the second window, as teams like fortify their financial plans, and I think we'll probably do a better job of keeping their studs home.
Yeah, which is why I think at this moment that it's way more beneficial to put the emphasis on what the next 10 practices look like for Jason Moore, what they look like for Tywone Malone. It's been a couple years, removed since he arrived again through the portal. It wasn't an instant game changer for Ohio State. He needed to change his body, change the approach, get rid of the baseball stuff like that. Maybe you'll see the fruits of that pay off right now for him. That's where that attention needs to be, rather than who can they entice into the portal. Like, you know for sure that those guys on the roster are the ones that you should be building around. And if it comes time to supplement that, you don't know what that's going to look like. You do know what you can do with that group that was been recruited and been developed here for several years, and that's, I think, what Larry Johnson's going to be focused on later on Tuesday, and what we're going to be asking about anyway.
Yeah, I think what Larry Johnson says specifically about Jason Moore and Tywone Malone. Am I forgetting anybody? I guess Will Smith, but I don't want to put like too much stuff on a guy who's like just getting his feet under him necessarily. But I also don't want to write him off. So yeah, lump Will Smith in there too. Like those three guys. What are the vibes around those three? And we're early in spring. I wish like we would save lineman talk until the end of spring, because it is hard. I think like last year we talked to the offensive lineman like immediately.
Yeah.
And Justin Fry's like, I don't know, we just started. So it's like
I haven't even put the pads on yet.
Yeah. So we'll talk with Larry Johnson after 2 padded practices, I guess. So how much could he actually learn? Perhaps not that much, but you want to hear encouraging things about those three either way, because I think those three individuals do a lot to maybe like alter what you think about what this defense could be.
Yeah. Well, we'll hear from Larry Johnson and the Rushmen in the Woody Hayes Athletic Center later on Tuesday. So we'll break all of that down as soon as we get the chance. Looking forward to that. It's going to be spring practice number 5 for the Buckeyes at the Woody. So stay tuned for that. Full coverage coming on the podcast, and we'll be back on Wednesday with the Podcast Daily. You don't want to miss a single episode. For Bill Landis, I am Austin Ward. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you later.